Bibb's a retired educator and a county planner. Bibb's family has lived in the old Pamunkey Neck for over 3 centuries. Family came here before King William was formed. So he's got the background and the family history to go with his talk this afternoon. Bibb has spent over 25 years, although he doesn't look that old, studying and researching the history of Virginia, King William County, and West Point. And I think much of what he'll give you today will be where you can find this history. I happen to have gotten kind of a sneak preview of part of it. And many parts of it can be applied to your own searches for genealogy and interest in your own history. So I don't have much more to say to introduce you, Mr. Edwards. Are you almost ready here?
We need to kill the lights.
Oh, we'll kill the lights. I'll take care of that for you. By the way, this stall was my fault. I was supposed to bring a computer. Good. Do we have enough? Bibb?
Thank you. And thank you for the invitation to come back. As my mother would have said, bless your hearts. This is a beautiful day, just like it was last time, and you've come to hear me again a year later. I don't know to what I owe this honor, but I'm glad to be here to share with you something that I think is reasonably important for our community. And I don't live here, and I'm from up the country, but I still think of it as basically our community. My father would be aghast here again. He graduated from West Point High School 1935 and would be very amazed that I'm here today, so I really appreciate the offer. Now, how many of you were here a year ago? Raise up your hand. And you're back. My goodness. Bless your, as my mother would say, bless your hearts again. This is going to be a continuation, basically, of where what I had to say last time. The name of this program is Hidden in Plain Sight, Part 2, The Primary Sources of King William County and West Point, Virginia. What they are and where to find some of them. If you go to the next slide, please. This is what I did last time. Hidden in Plain Sight, The History of King William County, Virginia. Next. And I was complaining of 2 things. Number 1, here we are in the center of the known universe, center of Tidewater, Virginia, and we don't have a first-class, general-purpose history of the county that's been written. And I was appalled when I started doing my research. Here's an example, I showed it last time, of one for Hanover. Now, what do they have over in Hanover? We don't. Tomatoes, and I drop off very quickly. So, here we are in the center of Virginia history, and we don't have such a volume, what I call a secondary source. Next, please. I did a literature review of what we do have, and we have Peyton Neal Clark, Ryland, Harris, and Dill, names that should be familiar to you if you've done any reading about the county and the community. And these are the folks whose work I'm basically, I'm standing on their shoulders. Anything that I do is based on work that they did in the past, and I'm certainly appreciative of the work that they did, but none of them actually wrote a large, comprehensive history of the county. And I tried to figure out why. Next, please. By the way, I did have a shout out for this book here, if you remember last time, which deserves a great deal of credit. Next, please. And Reverend Palmer's book, the most recent books that have been written, again, but they're narrow focused. And I was looking for something larger. Next, please. And so I tried to come up with why this was the case. And I said, lack of focal points. Pamunkey Neck was an Indian territory with a moat around it, those big rivers. Then we had a lot of rental property here, long and narrow, lack of commercial centers. Not a great place for an army, so we don't have battlefields. Great battlefields like they have over New Kent, for example, to focus in your attention. Next, please. And then I mentioned the burned records that have occurred in all sorts of, in 3 different places here. New Kent, King and Queen, King William, and the town of West Point have all had some of their primary source records burned over the years, and here's some of the dates involved. If you destroy the primary source records, it makes it hard to write a history, as I'm sure you know. Next, please. And I also mentioned that after the Civil War, there was not much of an interest to write Virginia local histories anyway. Many of the families that were founded, that founded the county were in decline. Much of King William after the war was up for sale. The town of West Point was dominated by people from someplace else, Maryland, New York, you name it. This town was full of folks not from King William, and most of the people who were actually changing the community were not from King William at that point. So there really wasn't a group of people who would be interested or involved in the history of the county enough to put the time and energy into writing such a book. Next, please. So here's what's the problem. Scattered primary sources, few secondary source references. It's been difficult to write a history of King William. Just to be blunt about it. We have a history here. It's just been more difficult than most people wanted to deal with. Next, please. So here we come to my program today very quickly. I want to bring to your attention as best I can some primary sources that are available, that are, as I say, hidden in plain sight, that you should know about, and hopefully people can find this information and use it to write their histories, whether it be a family history, a history of a small community, a church, a crossroads, or the whole county for that matter. Next, please. So what's a primary source? Original materials that are created at the time under study. Very simple. Letters written during the Civil War are excellent primary sources for what was going on during the Civil War. Same thing, letters home from soldiers in World War I or World War II. Primary sources about those events. Hate to use war all the time, but it does get our attention. Secondary sources are books like that, who take primary sources and build the larger story out of them. Next, please. So here's some examples of what I call a primary source. Written documents. This is what, us historians generally just pore over all the time. Government paperwork, private letters, business records, newspapers, drawings, maps, even down to artifacts, material culture, buildings, clothing, tools, things people used at a particular time that is under study. Next, please. And so where are these primary sources? Well, they're all over the place. Libraries, museums, archives, private collections. Sometimes they're between your ears and your own memories. Electronic storage. We all live in an electronic world today. A lot of these pieces of information have been digitized and are available or stored in that form. You can find a remarkable number of primary sources that come up for sale on eBay, for example. And you find them in stores that specialize in this kind of thing. And here's the ones that I want to bring to your attention one more time. They're in your attics, your basements, your closets, your drawers. They're underground, they're underwater. Occasionally they end up in dumpsters. They're burned up, and they go to the landfill. Next, please. In other words, they're gone. And once the primary source is gone, almost by definition, they're gone forever. No one can ever use them again to learn about the past. Next, please. So what we're going to do today, very quickly, is talk about these 9 particular kinds of primary sources that I have used in my research and are available to just about anybody in this room who wants to get their hands on them for your research. And that's honestly what I'm trying to do today, is encourage each and one of you to think of yourself not as a member of a historical society, but a historian, because that's what you really are. You have a role to play, if you wish to, in the preservation, the identification of primary sources, and you can also write your own histories once you get this information. So why not? Maybe it's because some of this stuff is hidden right in front of us. Next, please. Land patents. Next. This is a land patent, a digital image that I found at the Library of Virginia, a website 10 years ago. And it just happens that the original land patents for the colony of Virginia have all been digitized. They're sitting in the Library of Virginia in in archives where you generally shouldn't get your hands on them, but they have very good copies that you can get to on the internet. And one day I happened to stumble across that, quite by accident. And so being an Edwards, I typed in Edwards, let's see all the land patents with Edwards on it. A whole bunch of them popped up. Nobody I knew. And I was just randomly looking through some of them. As you can tell, they're not easy to read. And I clicked on that one. It came up on the screen. And I was about ready to click off when I saw the word acquaintant in the writing. I mean, it's hard to pick out. I'm not even sure I could do it now. Well, that really got my attention because Acquaintant Swamp, Acquaintant Creek, is right next to the Edwards homestead in the central part of the county, just north of the courthouse. And all of a sudden I realized that in a place that was supposedly settled by my ancestor in 1745, and he supposedly came over from England in 1745, 45 years earlier, there was an Edwards living on that same property. Suddenly the family story that I heard, was open to question. That was the first clue. And I will be honest with you folks, when I saw that, the hair went up the back of my head, just like this, and I went, oh no. In fact, that's probably not what I said, but we won't go there. Notice the other thing about this was said to be in King and Queen County. Do the next slide, please. This is the catalog entry for that particular image. And notice that it says, location, King and Queen. Well, in 1701, King William, Monkey Neck, was part of King and Queen County. If I had looked at King William only, I would have never found this. So you have to know a little bit about the history to find out something about your family, where what drawer the information is in. Next, please. Now, moving on pretty quickly here, U.S. Census records. Everybody knows we have a census every 10 years, and a lot of people have used them to look up family information. They're sort of what I call the low-lying fruit of historical research. Everybody knows what they are. Next, please. Here's a census from 1830. The individual page, you'll notice it sort of looks familiar. You've got the names on the left, various categories, and little marks for numbers, categories on your right. Next, please. Here's one, a lot more new. 1940, they came out available for the public just about the time I was speaking last year. They're available online, and I happen to put up West Point here just as an example. So if someone was living in West Point, unless the census somehow missed them, here is information about them. Not only it's the name's still on the left, it also has much more information about their families, family members' ages, when they were, when they got married in some cases, what the occupations were, where they came from. In other words, as you know, it is a treasure trove of information about family members. And this is something that is very commonly used, and I don't need to talk about it much anymore, but it is hidden in plain sight, partially because people still don't use it very, I think appropriately much. That you need to learn more about the types of information on there and how to interpret it. Next. Now, if you go to the U.S. Census Bureau website, you'll get a nice page like this, and they've got a wonderful website. Trust me, it is first class, it's great, and you can't learn a thing about your family from it. This is America, folks, and we've been all privatized. If you want to see your information, next please, you have to go to Ancestry.com or someplace like it. And if you go to your local library, they usually have a subscription to that, and they can help you find whoever you're looking for in the records. But you can also do this from the privacy of your own home if you pay Ancestry enough money, which I do every year. I like them. They do a good job. I'm not complaining. All I am saying is that these are public records, and you have to pay a private company to look at them. That rather bothers me, but the editorial is now over. Next, please. Tax records. Remember, next, please. I talked about these last time. The tax records for King William are a wealth of information. They are in perfect shape. They're in the Library of Virginia, and they are uninterrupted since 1782, with the exception, as I said last time, of one page is missing out of almost about 10,000 of them. Next, please. Here's one from 1840. You'll notice there's, well, why do I care about taxes? Who cares how much tax was paid? That's not the question. Who cares? Here's somebody's name. Here's the acreage they have. This is where it's located. In many cases, they will say who they bought it from. If you see it for a particular year and that person's still alive. I've been tracing people using tax records when I had no idea whether they were dead or alive. And then when they disappear, or it becomes an estate, they're no longer alive and someone is administering their property. These are very valuable. Next, please. Here's one for West Point. Personal property, 1882. Now, there was no census in 1882 that you can turn to see who was here, but you can turn to the tax records and see almost the same thing. So, I encourage you to use these tax records along with the census records and other things that you might have to do your research. They are very valuable. Next, please. Now, after I spoke with you last time, I went, about a week later, I ran across this information. Dr. Lemuel Edwards owning lots 284, 85, and 86 in the town of West Point. I happened to go to the clerk's office, and either those lots are located right where you're sitting right now, or one block over. I haven't decided yet. But certainly long enough so that Tiger Woods probably could make a putt from one to the other. Give him a couple of shots at it. Now, he bought these lots, I find out, because I look at the tax records, in 1863. He used Confederate money. It's the middle of the Civil War. He sold them in 1881. So he sold them for greenbacks, for money that was good. So basically, I know which lots he owned. He was a speculator. He bought the lots to sell later. He sold them to Peter Adams. He was a speculator also. This is the kind of information that you can find out from the tax records and basically nowhere else. So I encourage you, if you're interested in the early days of West Point, tax records are one of the best sources you have to find out who is where. And when you look at the tax records, you can also see whether there's a house on those lots. If there's a house on the lot, they're probably living there. If not, then it's an open lot that may be built on later, which a lot of lots were. Next, please. Now, where do you find these? You find them at the Library of Virginia. How many people have been to the Library of Virginia doing research? Not as many as should be. It is a wonderful building. They're full of nice people, and they can show you these on microfilm. There's free underground parking. If you are scared to drive into Richmond and you don't know where you're going to park, you can park for free in the basement. That's where you can go to look at them 5-6 days a week. Next, please. Or, if you're nice, I'll give them to you. Because last year, over the last couple of years, I copied every almost 11,000 sheets. Put them on CDs. They're yours. Put them on your computer. Use them for your research. Won't cost you, cheaper than going in, and they're cheaper than going in and all the way into Richmond as far as gas is concerned. So if you want to see those tax records, here they are. Next, please. Family papers. Now I'm going to start getting personal with you. Next, please. Here's a letter, 1866, from the gentleman up on the left, my great-grandfather, to my great-grandmother, the woman in the portrait at the bottom. It's a love letter, sort of. He's afraid he's a little afraid that maybe hadn't heard from her in a while. Maybe she's having second thoughts. So he's making a case again for what a great husband he would be. It's a real precious letter. It's preserved. Sue, don't we have this at Virginia Historical Society?
Yes.
Yes, we've donated it there so that anybody who wants to look at it, who's interested in King William history or help you interested in the Edwards family, can read what he wrote in 1866. He's standing up there in a photograph, we should talk about photographs later, looking like he's just been through a war, which he has. He looks pretty thin to me. He's got a wound on his arm where he took a bullet up in Pennsylvania or Maryland somewhere in 1863. All these letters tell stories. Next, please. Family stories. And more than likely, you have some of them, or you know somebody who does. They are precious to historians, they are precious to families, and they end up in dumpsters, they end up in an attic somewhere way too often to suit me as somebody who's interested in our history. Now, I told you last time about the Lewis Littlepage family's Caroline's Journal, 1864-67. It was donated to the Virginia Historical Society in, well, about 10 years ago. They lived up at Woodbury. Next, please. This is what the document actually looks like. It has obviously been out in the rain, you know, it's been wet. The family that inherited this journal has had it transcribed, and the transcription is available at the Virginia Historical Society, and because of, you know, nice people there, it's also available at the at King William Historical Society. It's very popular around the central part of the county because she's writing about friends and family and relatives of people who still live there. So I encourage you, if you have a journal or a diary, or you know of one in the family, the proper thing for that document, where it to go, is to an institution that can take care of it. Obviously, for many years, there was no one taking care of this. Now here's the sad part. That covers a period of about 2.5 to 3 years. End of the Civil War to 1867. A fascinating time in Virginia history. Too fascinating for lots of folks. She wrote for about 20 years and filled up multiple volumes like that. Most of them are gone. This is all we have. And I will tell you honestly, without any shame whatsoever, I got to the end of that transcription and I almost cried out loud, because she had become so close to me reading this woman's thoughts and feelings. She'd already had like 14 children. You know, this was not a teenager writing in a diary about things teenagers write about. This was a mature person with a lot of experience who saw the world very clearly, and she shared it, a voice that is gone forever and only lives now in this document. Next, please. There might be an announcement next year of something that's going to happen with that journal. I'll let you know. You've got a family Bible probably somewhere. This is our Edwards Family Bible. Thank you, Sue. People write stuff in family Bibles. Births, deaths. Sometimes they have things they put inside, your little cutouts of, you know, little pieces of paper. Those things are precious to families, again, and historians. If you have such a document, or you know somebody who's got a family Bible, this is a valuable primary resource for historians and family history. I guess what I keep coming back to is, you have some of this stuff right now in your homes and you know it. Help preserve it. Thank you. Well, I said there wouldn't be any more editorials, but I guess there were. Wills, deeds, bonds, scrapbooks, receipts, school reports, my report cards, military records. I have my father's military records from World War II. Was anybody interested in that in the 1950s? No. They are now. Transcripts, genealogical notes, all of these things are the foundation of people writing history. These are the kinds of things that end up every week. Someone donates to the Library of Virginia, the Virginia Historical Society, and private historical societies like yours, this kind of information. Next, please. The mother test. When my mother passed away several years ago, my sister and I had the responsibility to clean out the house. Mother was a pack rat. She kept a lot of stuff that we had no idea why, but she kept things that meant something to her. Sometimes things from 30, 40, 50 years old. If it passed the mother test, it's a primary source for historians and family. We didn't throw out much that she had saved. She was not saving it for herself as much as she was saving it for us, whether we appreciated it at the time or not. So look at the things in your house that you've been saving in your life. Think about the people who would maybe, not next week, not next year, but grandchildren, great-grandchildren, who would treasure these items for the rest of their lives. Think about the historians that could learn something about the times in which you or your grandparents or your parents lived in by analyzing professionally these documents. Save them. If they pass the mother test, they are valuable. Trust me, folks. Now, stop talking about my mother business records. Next, please. Fraser's Ferry store. This is a business record, a ledger from 1893. Down at the bottom it says, saved by Jesse Lipscomb. A bulldozer was tearing that building down in a rain, it was raining. He was standing there sort of watching it. I mean, it's the kind of thing people like to watch, buildings being torn down. These ledgers came flying out of the building, out of the top, and he went over and picked them up and saved them. Because of that, they're safe in his house right now. He is allowing us to copy these things so that these records from over 100 years ago of this little store up on that little river in that little county won't be lost forever. Next, please. Little Page store at the courthouse, even further back, 1823. In some of these, you will actually find, I can actually find, where some of my relatives went in and bought things. But wouldn't you like to see that every now and then? If you throw these things away, folks, they're gone forever, because nobody's publishing lots of, they're one of a kind. So what we're trying to do is encourage people to realize that business records are important as well, especially small country stores. They showed the rhythm of life, who's alive, who's doing what at any particular time. If you have your hands on old ledgers like this, please save them and preserve them. Next, please. Maps. I like maps. Next, please. Jefferson Fry map. Here's King William. You can learn a lot about the county looking at this old map about its early days. What was important? Where people lived. Family names. Where the roads were. There are some errors in there, but after a while you learn to see those. Next, please. Here's West Point. Roman Coke is on there. Colonel Moore's place is on there. Next, please. Here's a 1781 map. A lot of people already know this one. Again, war. This is basically the Braxton Farm at this point. Next, please. Civil War. Civil War is great for maps. And we've got a wonderful one for King William. Next, please. And here's what the county looked like. That little light there, that's probably where the Yankees had their defensive trenches or mounds. Next, please. In the 1930s, you'd be surprised how much the old Geological Survey maps show. They show cemeteries. They show roads that are 100 years old. Besides doing what they're best known for is the topography. Next. And then you can get Google Earth as of a week ago. Here's where you're sitting right here. Next, please. So save your old maps. If you want to, do like I did. Make up your own. This is a map that I worked on about 10 years ago, never finished it. Guilty. Historic places in King William County. I'm still working on this. I actually hope to finish it within the next 10 years. But you can make your own maps using what I did as county road map. Next, please. Paintings and photographs. Okay, Sue, surprise. Got some of my family members here. This is one of my favorite photographs. This is the Edwards family. It's February 28th, 1948. My mother and father are there, my grandparents, and two little boys. The one that's not sitting up straight, who's messing around in his grandfather's lap, is me. And I noticed in this one someone has put a whistle around my neck. Now, who would have done that? Probably not my parents. So, family photos, what's important about that photo is that somebody needs to write on the back of that who those people are. You have photographs that are probably that old that you look on the back and you know who's on the front, but nobody else will when you're not around to tell them. Turn those things over, write down the dates and information as quickly as you can before it's all gone. I'm lucky. I have a little snapshot of my family that I can show and pass on to my grandchild. And maybe I'll even show them which one I am. Next, please. This is a photograph of where my daddy was living when he was in at West Point High School. May the 8th, this would take May the 8th, 1933. This is the old part of Riverview. Surprise, Beth. This is...
It looks, yeah, that's the same.
Yeah, it pretty much looks the same. This is the old part of Riverview House where my father was born and raised. Over in the courthouse, my grandfather out of the way of the picture so no one would take a picture of him. It didn't work. This was the WPA photographer. I ran across this completely by accident at the Library of Virginia. If you go ask for it, it's not even cataloged. So you have to, one of the things about the Library of Virginia and other places, you have to make friends with the folks, and sometimes they'll pull out stuff that'll surprise you. But these are photographs that are not coming back. 1933. Next, please. Sometimes it's just paintings. White House. Jim Harris isn't here, is he? I don't see Jim, because he knows more about, West Point history and King William history than he's forgotten more than I'll ever know. This is a painting made by a Union soldier just before they burned this house down. To my knowledge, there are no photographs of that house. But there is at least a couple of paintings. He did another one almost exactly like that. So this is where you go for your primary sources, because he was sitting there in 1862 with nothing else better to do than draw the picture for you. This is a primary source of what that building looked like at White House. Next, please. Zion Church. There's a long history here we don't have time for. By the time this photograph is taken in 1946, it's been used as an outbuilding, a shed, at B.W. White's up there near the road to Lanesville, just down from the courthouse. This was a church starting about 1845, 1850, and it stayed a church for 30-some years at least. You can tell it was used for something else later. That was an important place on the road from here to the upper end of the county. Everybody knew where Zion Church was. That's the only photograph that we know of it at all, of what it looked like. Because by the time people started taking photographs, it was just a nasty looking old building. Next, please. King William Courthouse. I'm still trying to date those photographs. I'm trying to find any photographs pre-1900 of the courthouse. They are not very well done, folks. As far as I don't know when these photographs were taken. This was out of Peyton Neal Clark's book. This, I think, is a little earlier. I've been looking at the trees trying to figure out, and tree stumps, to try to figure out which came first. It's not as easy as it sounds. Again, photographs, your historic photographs. If anybody can help me date these, or you have a better one, or one that shows the clerk's office that burned, I'll buy you dinner somewhere. I really want that bad. Next, please. Newspapers. Now we're getting towards the end of this, folks. I talked about newspapers last time. As you know, West Point started, 1870. There were always newspapers here. Most of them are burned and gone for the first 30-some years of West Point's history. There's only a handful left. This one is in, as you can tell, is encased in Mylar at the Library of Virginia. I took that photograph last year right after I talked with y'all. This is the earliest one that I know, volume 1, number 36, from 1872, West Point Star. Next, please. The West Point Virginian, College of William and Mary. Next, please. The Plain Dealer. There are only a few of these in existence. 1896, Virginia Historical Society. Next, please. And this is the earliest known Tidewater Review issue that's available on microfilm at the Library of Virginia. 1929. Practically yesterday. But Next, please. So I put together a list. I wanted to know how many old newspapers there were in King William. Somebody needed to do this. This is it. That's all that exists between 1872 and 1896. Some of those are duplicates. Now, I have a lead on some more, and I'm hoping to flesh that out a little bit more. But 99% of the newspapers from West Point are gone forever. Their primary sources, they're gone forever. Unless, of course, you have some in your attic. You know somebody who's got somewhere they're squirreled away. They're at the bottom of a drawer somewhere. Somebody's wrapped something fragile in them. But anyway, if you know of any of these, they are precious because they're not printing anymore, and there are very few left. By the way, a couple of these, one of those is at University of Texas in Austin, one is up in Worcester, Massachusetts. I haven't got my hands on those yet. Road trip. But eventually what I want to do is to have electronic versions of these available for everybody to look at. Just like I did this, I want to do that for all the West Point newspapers I can get my grubby little hands on. Okay, next please. This, of course, many of you know that the ones at William and Mary you can access through their website. What you may not know is that the reason that they exist is because my cousin and I went there, got down on our hands and knees with a camera, and took the pictures and then gave the pictures back to William and Mary for them to put up there. That's where they came from. You can do history, folks, yourself. You don't have to wait for experts or people who know what they're doing. You can make it up as you go, because look at me. Here we go. Next, please. Now, here's the one. This is the shocker to me. And this is something is about, I couldn't have said this last year because I didn't know it. There's a website called Genealogy Bank. Again, you have to pay. It's got old newspapers digitized for you to do research. So I decided, okay, King William, Richmond, just King William. Hit the button. 29,799 records. That's individual pages where the words King William appear. When I saw that, my heart just dropped because my question was, well, what do you do now, sucker? Well, here's what I'm doing. I started at the earliest ones. Oldest items first. I went to every page. I've cut and pasted up those into a folder in my computer. I now have several thousand articles in old Richmond newspapers. Eventually, I'll be able to put them on a disc and give them to anybody who wants, to you if you like. I'm in 1844. I've got a lot more to go, to say the least. Now, yes, some of those are duplicates. Some of those, when you look at them, may not make a whole lot of sense just looking at one. But all together, you ever look at a piece of a puzzle, just look at one piece? Well, that doesn't make any sense. Put some more pieces down there. The picture becomes clearer to you. This is one of the things you have to do with primary sources. You get a lot of pieces together, and they will tell you a story. In this case, the story of King William through your local newspaper, which happened to be in Richmond. It's not that far away. There is hardly an issue of a newspaper in Richmond in those days that did not have an article that included something about King William County and the people in it. Next, please. Okay, it's not the only one. Here's one called Newspaper Archive. I decided, again, to do King William, 5,000. And these are small newspapers, Danville, Harrisonburg, Martinsville. Why are they writing about King William? Because the people here did stuff. We are historic folks. Next, please. This one is free. Library of Congress. You may have been to this website. I happen to do West Point, in quotation marks. Now, yes, there are other West Points other than the one that we're standing in. Where is it? 34,000, I know you can't read it, 34,041 entries. 34,000 entries. just in that one website alone. Folks, there's plenty of primary source information about your community here. You just got to go look for it. And it's as easy as turning on your computer and doing a search and then going back and forth. Hidden in plain sight, it's been there all along. You just got to know how to find it. Next, please. Now, what did I find? I found that in West Point, 1898, they had a tournament involved. But there are people's names in here. Who are the field marshals? What is this all about? What is a tournament? Well, they dressed up like knights of the round table, and they rode horses, and they had a great baseball game at the same time. Next, please. I also found local matters, a meeting of the stockholders of the Richmond and York River Railroad Company. This whole article here, you can't read, of course, but trust me, it's there. And what did I find out? I found out how close that railroad came to putting the end of it over the other side of the river in New Kent County and not to West Point. That close. Anybody ever tell you that part of the West Point history? This is 1855, you'd always hear, well, they brought the railroad down to West Point. Well, why did they do that? And they had opposition at the time. Of course, the man who ran the railroad also owned the West Point Development Company, which had divided up this area down here in lots. So he eventually won, and West Point is the better for it. But that whole story is in this article. Again, one newspaper, one date. You'd never find that just stumbling around. And I doubt you'll ever find this story written by anybody before. Next, please. And speaking of catastrophes, town of West Point fire swept. The Times-Dispatch, the day after the fire here. Now, there's no local coverage of it because all the newspapers were burned. But long article. Next, please. The next day, heart of West Point in ruins. If you want to find out about the fire, as people at the time found out about it, you have to look at the newspaper. And again, Richmond paper is your hometown paper as far as that's concerned. By the way, that fire occurred May the 1st. Some people write it was May the 3rd. And if you look at the dates on the newspaper, it's pretty clear it happened May 1st, 1903. Next, please. Other articles here. Great day in King William. King William Affair. Some of these were just social news that you're reading. This is a great festival that they had. Entertainment to be held at the courthouse about the monument fund. Monument, let me guess. West Point has grown, those who have made happen. View of the business section, 1906. So obviously they have rebuilt. These are all in the Richmond newspapers. This is how you find out your own history. Sometimes you have to look someplace else. Next, please. King William County records. And here's the one that I've been trying to get to. Next, please. If you go to the courthouse today, go to the clerk's office, and you want to see some records that apply to your family or some property that you own, it's pretty straightforward stuff. There's an index, and then the index gives you an opportunity to see a nicely written, fairly recent bit of legal documentation. This happens to be my grandfather's, basically the legal paperwork associated with him buying Riverview Farm that you just saw from 1918. Next, please. But what about those burned records? You remember we had a fire at the clerk's office, 1885, of which I have written extensively. What about those? Next, please. Most of us, if we know anything about the burned records, we found out about them through Elizabeth Hawes Ryland and her abstracts book. This is at the Library of Virginia. She, some years ago, we don't know exactly when, probably the 1940s, started looking through all the old photostatic copies, and she went page by page and did abstracts of what was on the page. Hundreds of pages of work on her part. She even started to go blind doing the work. So we know about our county records that were burned, a lot from this woman here. She's the, bless her heart, I need to put flowers on her grave next, the nearest opportunity, because I owe her a lot in giving me the opportunity to know where to go after her work. Next, please. There are two other folks who've done the same thing. Antient Press, the Sparacios, same thing. Next. And more recently in 2006, another person, the same thing. Well, I've got all three of these. And what struck me was you would look at the entries for a particular page and they would be similar but not the same. People would read things, and what would be important to one person or legible to one person would not be to someone else. So I wondered, next please, where do I go? Where do I find more information about this? Well, the first place I went was the Library of Virginia. Remember the free underground parking. I want you to get there and remember the parking. Next please. Most of you who have been there and have asked about these records have been given some microfilm or shown the microfilm. And you looked at them at a machine like this. I call this a torture machine. It'll drive you blind and crazy. You put them on there, you crank like this, and if you're lucky, you'll be able to get an image that you can read. And then once you've got it, you stare at it and decide, well, what do I do next? Because there's no way to copy off of that at all. You would have to take it over to another machine, spend 75 cents to get a copy of what you found the hard way. Most of the experience people have dealing with the burned records is just like this. As my sister would say in the background, I almost went blind and I gave up. And it's very frustrating. This is where our oldest county records are, the form they're in, and I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's very unpleasant to get to them. Next, please. On top of that, just like the index you had before, they'll give you a real index. So you look up family names. There are a lot of Edwardses in here. But look at this. You can't read the bottom. You can't even read the page numbers. Try looking at that. Well, that's what you see. So how discouraging can that be? Well, enough to turn most people, I don't think I'll do my research on somebody else in the family or another county. Next, please. Now, if you pull out the records and you get the microfilm, this is the oldest page, the first page you come to, and it's the oldest, from 1702. And this is what you would see at its best. This is what you see on those new computerized readers where you can adjust the image a little bit to read it better. This is what it looks like. You've got this dark places down here. You can hardly read. What's this down here anyway? And so this is what Elizabeth Hawes Ryland had to work with. This is what the Sparacios and Beverly Conley had to work with. 1702. Next, please. Here's what, if you think that that's just because it's old, here's what, just before the fire. Again, this is one that has to do with some Edwardses. I don't know what you do with that, but I go home. There's a limited, I have a limited amount of time. I've driven all the way to Richmond. I pull that out, I look at it, and I say, am I really going to understand what this is all about? So this is the condition of your records. I mean, these are your records, King William citizens. Next, please. So, I ask myself, what happened to the originals? And I don't get a good answer. I can't find anybody who seems to know. I asked the people at the Library of Virginia, and they said, well, we don't have them. And I said, well, they can't be at the courthouse. I mean, how would they? Nah. And I kept asking people at the Library of Virginia. Finally, one of them took some mercy on me and basically said, I will go look at every nook and corner, and I'll come back with you. And he looked at me, he came back later, and he said, Bibb, we do not have them. So I said, well, where are they? Next, please. So, at this point, I'm doing some research for something that I was writing when I was speaking with you last time, called Our Courthouse Fires in the Historical Society of King William It was in their newsletter. Some of you may be members of both, which I would encourage. But anyway, I was doing research on the courthouse fires, and of course the burned records are certainly part of that story. Next, please. While I was doing that, I ran across this volume written by this West Point historian that you should know, and this page. And it says, I'm not going to try to read it all, a final note should be added about the modern clerk's office and the records. The two oldest fire-damaged books were put in order and restored by the Society of the Descendants of Henry Fox and his wife, Ann West. Subsequently, the Board of Supervisors, under the recommendation of Mr. Hill, Thomas Hill, financed the lamination of these at the Barrow Library, Library of Virginia. Great! I know where they are. Well, no, I don't. I just know what happened to them. So Alonzo Dill is being real coy here. He says that they exist and all this work has been done, but he still doesn't tell me where they are. Next, please. This is, you're seeing something for the first time. It's been out of the Library of Virginia vaults. I ran across this by accident. No, not completely by accident, but I didn't know it was going to drop out of the folder. 4 photographs made in 1918 of the burned records of King William. A librarian named Mamie Garland took this photograph. A lady was coming down from Maryland who did she did a series, it's basically a series of publications, little notebooks on county courts in Virginia. Why she was doing it, I have no idea. But she went to King William Courthouse. These are the hands of B.C. Garrett Sr., I believe. He was certainly clerk at the time. He's handling these, he's opening them up, and Mamie Garland is taking a photograph for us to look at almost 100 years later. I'd like to thank all of them. And on top of that, she wrote on the back of who took the picture and the date. See, you're getting the point. Notice here at the bottom, as he's showing these, they're falling apart in his hands. So I ran across that and took that particular photograph, and it just took my breath away to realize that that's what our records looked like in those days. And I hoped that if I did run across them, they didn't look that bad. So I thought I'd share that with you to give you some idea of what they look like, 30 years after the fire. Next, please. So here's where the story gets a lot better. Lloyd Huckstep and I made an appointment to meet with our clerk of court, and we wanted to see if we, see once and for all where those records were. And I don't think we really told Patricia Norman what we were up to that day, but we showed up. We said we're looking for some old records, and Patricia was just as nice as she could be, and she said, well, all of our records are back there. You can go back and I hope you can find what you're looking for. And so I walked back and I found these books. And it said, Records, Book 1, 1702. And I said, wow. Some of the old stuff. And I pulled it out. And that's when I got my surprise. Next, please. Now, this is what I was expecting to find. I was expecting to find the photostat copies that were made in the 1930s of the documents that you just saw in that photograph just a little bit earlier. And this, of course, is exactly what you saw a few minutes ago. This is what I expected to see. Next, please. What I didn't expect to see was that.
Same page.
Same page. That's the condition that it was in when I opened. Lloyd and I looked at this, and we just were almost stunned. I know we were both stunned. I don't know what the expression on my face was. That's that same page as it exists today, after it had been conserved by the Fox family, that we saw. See how much more legible that is? One of the things you can do is read a lot first. You can read a lot more. You also see the story here. This is water damage down at the bottom. because when these were smoldering in the clerk's office, somebody came along after the clerk had gone back home and didn't seem to care, and I'm not going to forgive him for that, and pulled these out and threw water on them as they were smoldering. And a lot of these pages have water damage because of it. But it's better than not being there at all. Next, please. This is the difference between the two. Now, I ask you, if you were doing any kind of research, which would you rather read? Next, please. Now, credit where credit is due. In that booklet, there is a little piece of paper, 1964, restored in the memory of Ann Pritchard Woodard Fox. No, in the memory, yes. Founder and first president of the Society of the Descendants of Honorable Henry Fox and his wife, Ann West, 1864. There was something else I noticed. Off to the right, there was a stamp. And it says, microfilmed, Virginia State Library, 1981, by Donald Lewis. Okay. What's that all about? Next, please. Well, the long and the short of it is that the Library of Virginia had photographed those in 1981, and no one had ever made microfilm from those photographs of all the burned records. We located through the, again, my friend of mine at the Library of Virginia, located the original photographs done in 1981, and a set of microfilm has been made of these records that you saw it in the shape that you saw, the good records, and a set has been sent to Patricia Norman. By the way, Patricia, raise your hand. We're going to talk about you. Here's Patricia. If you go to the Library of Virginia today and ask for and go look for the burned records of King William County, you will not get them because they didn't make a second set. This stuff costs money, and the Library of Virginia's budget has been slashed and slashed some more. They don't have the money to put them out for you to look at. The only reason Patricia got them is because there's state funds that are collected to pay for copies for the clerks. One copy, and that's it. And you had to ask, And we didn't know that they existed up until, last summer. So, what do I decide to do? I decide to put my head on the chopping block and stick it out and ask Patricia Norman, your clerk of court, Patricia. And at that point, by the way, we hadn't found those 1981 photographs. If I bring a camera here and set it up, can I take photographs of all these old burned records? And she said yes. And I about had a heart attack because first, I didn't own a good enough camera. I had no idea how I was going to go about doing it, but I knew I was going to do it. So what you see here is currently, I think it's maybe, is it disassembled? It's still sitting there.
Still sitting there.
In the back room at your clerk's office. This is sort of a jury rig. This is made out of pipe from Lowe's. Does it look familiar? But it actually works. I can put my camera here and I can take pictures, high quality, color photographs, not black and white this time, of your burned records. Now, there are thousands and thousands of pages of those, of which we are about 60% finished. Hopefully, by the summertime, we'll be finished and we'll be able to give to who needs them, and especially to the county for their use, color images of these burned records. What does it say? 5,925 pages photographed so far, books 1 through 11. There are 18 books. Now here's why this is a particular interest to people in West Point. Why do I care about 1700 whatever? West Point was, cattle yard, cows are grazing here. A lot of the records that do survive are from the latter part of that time period up to 1885. On top of that, people re-recorded deeds. Because this was boom town down here, there's a lot of stuff about the early King William history that is in those early burned records and what was re-recorded thereafter. What needs to be done is that good indexes need to be made available so that you can go find the information that you might be interested in finding. Or like me, stumble across stuff you had no idea existed. So, next please. And I'm coming to the end. We focused on these areas, tax records. I haven't finished those, by the way. Maps, I haven't finished that one, by the way. Newspapers, I haven't finished that, by the way. And the county records, well, you know. These are ongoing projects to make available to anybody who wants them. Primary source materials for your county and your town's history. And it's being done by jacklegs like me, and I'm inviting you to think of yourself as an amateur like me. You can do your own history, you can preserve your own history by looking after your primary sources. I happen to be fortunate enough, or crazy enough, to try to make this available to other people, where I could be doing, I think, something more fun, because this is a fair amount of work. The upshot of it is, however, other people will be able to use this information for generations to come as historians. Your children, your grandchildren, whoever you can start getting to come to these meetings, will now have something to work with that they didn't have 10, 15, 20 years ago. Next, please. I'd like to thank Patricia Norman, clerk of the circuit court, first up at the top for giving me the topic to work from here. No one has done any more for historic research and preserving these records than Patricia Norman, and she's here today, and she brought something that I thought you might like to see. Lloyd, could you help me hold this thing? I told you that there were, now we're going to do this without ripping the shreds.
Right here?
Okay.
Yeah.
These
the old ones.
These are the old photostat copies that were done in the 1930s. This is the books that sat out for many years at the clerk's office for you to use. Whoops, we're sort of getting in the way of the videographer here. That's what people had to work from to find out their county history. Now, put that aside. Let's be real careful with this. Ladies and gentlemen, your volume 1, page 1, 1702, your county records. Thank you. Patricia, do you have any comments? Did I get the story pretty well right?
You got the story very well right. You know, I think you and Lloyd, y'all came in that day, and I said, y'all were looking, and I said, well, let me show you what some books are. I don't know what they are, but I stumbled on them, and there they are. Did not know, I had no idea what they were.
Let me tell you, many county clerks are pretty hostile to historical research. Yours is not. She's got her heart in the right place, and she's been cooperating 100%. We've been listening to her, she's been listening to us, and hopefully this project will continue, and we have some more records that I won't tell you about that we have discovered in a janitor's closet that we hope at some point will also become part of your historical record. So with public officials like Patricia Norman, what we have at this point at least is in pretty good hands. Thank you very much.
Yes, very.